this world, according to this philosophy, is opposites. Hot, cold, pleasure, pain, joy, sorrow. Hooty hoo! We back with another daily reflection on the daily Vedantic talking that Vedanta donk. And today's reflection is on the gospel of both. So much of the time in our daily lives, any subject we encounter in our daily lives, we want to know the thing. We ask our children, what was your favorite thing from school today? We want to know that one big pro tip that's going to help you with your career or productivity, especially Silicon Valley. People want to know. They want to know that one big tip when it comes to X, Y, or Z. The most important thing for fundraising, the most important aspect to hiring, the most important characteristic of a great founder. It's perfect clickbait. But within philosophy and within life, it is never just one thing. Within Vedanta, within the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, there is a principle of Neti, which means not this, not this. Anytime you think you've got it. This philosophy has a nice little moniker. Not this, not this. The truth is not in a book. It's not in some revered text. That's not it. It's not in your own wisdom, growing and evolving, progressing. That's not it. It points to it, but anytime we think we can, it's like a dreamer and the dream. If you are in the dream, everything is created by the dreamer. But you can't point up in the sky and say, that's the dreamer. Point down into a lily and say, that's the dreamer. Point to another person or even point to yourself. You can't even point to yourself in the dream, as a subject in the dream, and say, this is the dreamer. Another way that this philosophy talks about this is the moon branch example. This is 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 year old concept of the moon branch, where you point to a branch and say, do you see that branch? Do you see the sliver of the moon? And the person says, no, I don't see the sliver of the moon. I don't know, is that called the waxing moon, waning moon? Basically, when the moon has a tiny sliver. And you point to it and someone's like, no, I don't see it. You say, you don't see the moon right there? And they say, no, I don't see it. So then you point to the tree. Say, see the tree? Yes, I see the tree. Follow the tree trunk up. Okay. Do you see the branch that goes far to the left? Yes. Okay. At the tip of that branch, that's where the moon is. Oh, I see it now. It's pointing towards the truth, but everything it points to is not the truth. Neti, not this, not this. One of the ways that I think about it and have reflected on this in my daily life is it's also pointing to both. Anytime you think it's one thing, it's also something else. When you think it's all about your morning reflection, your study and reflection, you recognize, oh, it's also about my action throughout the day. The Gita is famously paradoxical because it tells us that action is paramount. A few seconds later, then it says wisdom, knowledge, jnana is paramount. And then in chapter 5, verse 4, clarifies that they're one and the same. To the truly wise person, action and knowledge are one and the same. They are part of the same sequence. Is the gospel of both, not just knowledge and building up your understanding, but also in how we act, what we do. There is the bothness of engagement and renunciation. As Christ said, be in the world, but not of the world. You're in it, but you're not of it. You can't just be not of it and not in it. And you can't just be in it and you're all about it. You have to be both. Renunciation in action is something that Swami will say quite often. Where you are both engaged in your life, you might be the best basketball player on the planet, working your tail off all day, every day. But you have a renunciation of any of the fruits of your craft. In fact, that is some of the most prolific creators. They don't think about the results. They get to that prolificness. They get to that proficiency, damn near perfection, because they're not constantly thinking, what am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of this? They're constantly focused on, all right, this is what I was born to do, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. I'm going to give myself away to this. Give everything I've got. Leave it all on the floor is what they say. Not, I'm going to use this craft to get as much as I can from the world. That certainly is the predominant approach. That is the predominant approach to life. But the lighthouses, the people that we talk about for hundreds and hundreds of years after their life, for thousands of years after their life, they're the ones that did not have an obsession over the results. But they were extremely engaged. Great example of this bothness, of this engagement in their world. But this renunciation from needing anything from the world. A great example is Socrates. Socrates was famously extremely engaged in teaching. Engaged in the art of discussing the truth. Was the most revered. Was the oracle Delphi, famously would give very ambiguous answers to questions that people would bring. But when the oracle was asked, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? She famously answered no. No one is wiser than Socrates. This extremely revered teacher on the topic of truth, reality, is most famous not just for his wisdom, but for famously saying, I don't know anything. Talk about a paradox, an engagement and a renunciation. Engaging with knowledge and yet renouncing the egoistic desire to say, I know. It's a beautiful gospel of both, to engage with a subject completely. Surrender your life to it. One's pursuit might be wisdom and knowledge, and that's their sole aim in their life, and yet each day they're emptying themselves of everything that they think they know. Emptying themselves of anything that many of us would point to as wisdom or knowledge, and yet that's how they attain it. Another example of this bothness, where we would think it's one of these things, and yet it ends up being this beautiful parody of both of them, would be our pursuit of freedom, liberation. And yet we're told within this philosophy over and over again that liberation comes from deliberation. The formless comes from form. You can't get to the formless through formlessness, through sitting on the couch doing nothing, thinking, all right, I'm just not going to have any form in my life and I'm going to get to freedom. We know that's just practicality. That's not even philosophy. We know where that leads. The couch potato is not free, is haunted by a lack of freedom and a constant search of it, but always in the wrong way. But when you live as Thoreau put it, I went to the woods to live deliberately. Went to the woods to live deliberately. To deliberately make choices for your life. To move away from just going with the herd, going along with how everyone else is doing it. That can feel deliberating. When you start a company, if you ever start a company or founders that might be listeners of the podcast, especially because I turned the podcast, my startup podcast, into the Daily Vedantic. Founders learn pretty quickly that you've got to be extremely deliberate with your time. You're trying to condense a 30-year career into 5. And that means that you've got to be extremely deliberate with each decision you make. And if you do that financially, if you do that with your time, if you do that with your resources, with all of the aspects, all of the inputs of building a company, then on the other side of it, after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, if you're able to sell the company, you do have freedom. You have freedom to do whatever you want with your time. And many of those founders then just start more companies because they actually find so much freedom, so much of a rhythm in life, so much pleasure when there is structure to their day. Some of the people that could be the most free, living on the beach, doing nothing, end up being the ones that have the most structure, up at the same time each morning. Same routines, workout routines that you'd be like, why are you doing this to yourself? And they crave it because they've recognized, they've tasted that liberation through deliberation, through living deliberately. And that is, whether they get there through personal experience or they get there through a personal philosophy, it is both. You have in your life liberation, joy, pleasure. Same time, you have deliberation, oftentimes putting yourself through sorrow, through pain. The last point on the gospel of both is the fact that we live in a world that is described as world as opposites. This world, according to this philosophy, is opposites. The gospel, the truth about this realm, this experience we call life, is that it will have joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, good and evil. Vedanta doesn't really have a concept for evil. The closest it gets is goodness bereft of a guide, but good and bad. What many might call undesirable. That duality, that is this world. You cannot get away from it. Trying to straighten it out, as Ramatirtha said, is like trying to straighten a dog's tail. This world is built on opposites. Hot, cold, pleasure, pain, joy, sorrow. This world's gospel is you are going to have both. And again, like we said at the top of the episode, it is our whole life is about trying to get just one. We're told in every advertisement that you can have just good. But that is a misconception. That is an illusion. The world is opposites. It is both. And if you take both paths of knowledge and action, selfless action, knowledge of the self, according to this philosophy, take both, which are one and the same path. Not one or the other, but both, which are one and the same path. that takes you to reality. It's almost like when you want to go 1,000 feet forward, is it your left foot or the right foot? That's important. Well, obviously it's both. And in each of these examples, you can conceptually try to think of it as right foot or left foot. And yet each one takes us back to the same answer, which is, well, it's both. In a world that wants to whittle everything down conceptually to one thing, to the most important thing, to the one big takeaway, to the one path, the one rule, the one goal, perhaps it is and has always been a gospel of both. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We will see you next time.